Gerard's brilliant keynote really tees us up for this next discussion, covering all sorts of themes about the need to make a business case and the need to make a financial case for investments in sustainability. The head rather than the heart. So we're now going to talk about corporate net zero strategies. And it's a real pleasure to introduce such a great panel. So on your left, Alessandro Ciampachini, Technical Director for Sustainability and Climate Change at WSP. Tom Salisbury, Director of Sustainability at GKN Automotive. Another Tom in the middle, Tom Abel, Director of Sales and Sustainable Solutions at Business Stream. Jess Beguiat, Managing Director of Climate Partner. And Maria Delma Rojas, Engagement Manager for Europe Science-Based Targets Initiative. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us on stage. Yeah. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't pick up directly on something that I tried to touch on with Gerard, which is it feels a different world, particularly in the last 6 weeks or so, if you're working on net zero strategies. Is it? Are we moving into a different era? And particularly are boards who have to make these investment decisions swayed by what they're hearing from various politicians around the world? Alessandro, can I ask you to pick up on that?
Absolutely. Good question. I think, there's expected questions.
It's got to be asked.
Well, answer is, I think, is yes and no. I think it's yes, because obviously we can't just live in a bubble. I think what's been happening recently, it's a bit demotivating for the community. This, I think, is crystal clear. However, I think working on the ground with clients, I work with, different range of organizations, different sectors, different sizes. I think, what really organizations are looking at the moment is, as we just heard in the previous session, is the long term, medium term. So I think, organizations, most of them, I'd like to think, are looking at this as an opportunity, I think. And we see that, a lot of organizations are using this time to stand up and saying, well, we still have our commitments and we want to make it. However, I think whole happening around business cases and making net zero work from a business perspective is absolutely key. And I think as as a sustainability professional, we need to be a bit better on that to sell the business case of net zero.
Anybody else want to pitch?
Yeah, I think obviously it's not great, it's not ideal, but I think again, sort of re-emphasising some of the messages from the previous presentation. Actually, we can't just rely on regulation, and we can't just rely on governments to drive impact in organisations. And I think those businesses really understanding the value of sustainability, the value of net zero, I think will continue because the business case is strong, and the onus is absolutely when boards are maybe hearing different messages, the onus on sustainability teams is to make sure that value is really fully understood by boards, by executive teams, and maybe businesses might not necessarily talk about it as much. We see quite a lot of that, but those who truly understand the value or truly understand the risk beyond compliance to regulation, but actually security of supply, these types of things, I think will continue because it makes business sense.
Yeah. Tom, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah.
You're seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we'll repeat the same message that what was said on the 20th of January wasn't anything anyone would advocate and support in this room, I'm sure. But to your point, Tom, if you are in the middle of a cycle and you have tangible benefits associated with those investments and with those plans, you're not going to retract from that because you've made it for the right reason. And there's actually been quite a lot of positive, even just a few weeks ago, a lot of retailers lobbying the government around, trying to push sustainability across the agriculture industry. So yes, we've got all of this American news bombarding us, and it's a lot of grandstanding and fanfare. And I know there's some very serious diluting of, initiatives going on with some big businesses there. So I'm not trying to dilute that message either, because it's not great. But actually, there's a lot of other positive stuff going on, and America isn't the planet, right? And there's a lot of other positive things going on in this country as well. So to Tom's point, and to echo that, if businesses are investing for the right reasons in the right strategies, whether that's benefits-based or environmentally based, they will carry on doing that. And sometimes they're already 2-3 years into an investment cycle, as we've just heard. So people aren't, and the customers we're dealing with, we haven't seen a single step change in any of those. They're still very ingrained and embraced in those programs, but it will be about keeping that momentum going.
And Jess?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat the messages that have already been shared, but there's clearly some uncertainty. There is, I acknowledge it. We acknowledge it at Climate Partner. But one of the things that we've noticed on the ground with our clients is actually there's more clients setting targets, often with you folks at SBTI, than ever before. There's more clients understanding their roadmap. There's more clients making their contributions to climate projects. And actually the momentum on the ground is really there, and we're seeing our clients learn, educate internally, educate their customers, their suppliers, which is driving that momentum. And I think that's really echoed across the UK. There was actually a statement by the CBI recently which said that the sustainability industry in the UK is growing 3 times the rate as the UK economy. So there is a boost that is happening there. And of course there's uncertainty, and we do have to take that seriously and question it. But I think it's our responsibility to drive it forward and keep that momentum going.
It makes for a more fun panel when people disagree, but I have to agree. If you've worked in sustainability long enough, maybe you saw a previous Trump presidency, you've been dealt blows before, but progress continues. And as Gerard said, as multiple colleagues have said, compliance isn't everything. And I'm really happy to say that at the Science Based Targets Initiative, we've hit a milestone of 10,000 companies setting voluntary targets. Just this year, we validated 600 targets in the last 2 months. So from the corporate side, it's a really positive story of companies continue to set their commitments, set a long-term vision and near-term targets as well for progress.
Can I pick up on one other point that Gerard mentioned in the last keynote, this dichotomy between the heart and the head, that sustainability professionals have got to talk the language of business and make cases almost exclusively in terms of business, bottom line, growth, profit. Do you see that is already embedded, or there's still a challenge in drawing up net zero strategies to have sustainability colleagues focus on business principles rather than principles of the heart? Tom?
Go on.
I was going to say, I think one of the key things that we've seen with our clients is exactly that there needs to be a business case associated with sustainability. If sustainability sits outside of the business, it's often just seen as a cost rather than a value driver. And when we've had clients that have maybe launched a sustainable product, but it doesn't come with any associated value add, so nobody's buying it. And I think a really good example is, imagine if you were going to Boots and you were looking to buy a new deodorant. If you saw there was a sustainable deodorant on the shelf, but it might not have the same features as what you normally use, would you buy it? I know I buy deodorant for a reason, I probably wouldn't. But there are some companies that are getting this right, and many of you might have seen that Unilever just bought Wild deodorant for 200 million. And Wild deodorant is, yes, sustainable, it is refillable, but on top of that, it's also natural and kind to your skin and has other value-added benefits. So when you start to integrate sustainability into the value of your business, that is when you're more likely to get consumers buying your products, buying your services, because they're not having to sacrifice for the sustainable option. I think that's something we're really starting to see more and more, and educating the exec teams of our clients on taking sustainability from a pure cost to also a value.
Yeah, and I think the point I was going to make is also that it's not on the CSO to go and convince the board, right? It's on the leadership of that business to make a decision that that is your purpose as an organization. And if it doesn't come from the top of a business, you know, our organization, our KPIs, right the way across our business are linked to sustainability targets as well as profit and operational efficiency and other things. So everyone in the business sees that straight line up. If the CSO is sitting over here trying to convince a board to do something when they're just focused at the shareholder price, that genuinely won't work. Right? It needs to come from the top. So that leadership and sort of straight line vision of that performance. And there is value everywhere. We just heard about the example of UPS. And that's delivering proper value, you know, all the way around that triangle. So it's about finding those and associating that with the direction of your business. But if you don't have that leadership, I think any business will struggle. And the businesses we deal with, they're in a myriad of different places. Some are in excellent positions like that, and some less so because they haven't really got that joined up thinking. And, you know, lots of people in this room and ourselves are trying to work with organisations to help them through that journey.
And I think that's often a really important role of kind of sustainability teams and CSOs in terms of translating, you know, because a lot of the time you're working with people across the organisation who are quite internally focused. You know, they're driving, you know, operations, etc., etc. And so how you translate that external environment, whether it be kind of changing consumer trends or climate impact on supply chains, or all of these different external factors, how you translate that into hard business cases. So, because I think effectively we shouldn't be doing anything that doesn't make business sense. So really having that discipline of defining that why this makes business sense for your business, whether that be value creation or risk mitigation. I think that's a really important role that sustainability teams need to play. But to do that, you need to be really entwined with different colleagues, whether it be kind of in finance or commercial, to really justify that business case.
And I think just one point to add to the business case perspective is the cost of inaction, because I think we've got to communicate, you know, to businesses, to boards, what's the cost of inaction. So what's going to be your business in 10, 20, 30 years' time if you don't implement some of those measures? Are you going to be resilient enough against climate change in the next 20 years? What's going to be your supply chain? What's going to be your manufacturing, your distribution model in the next 20 years? Yeah. So the cost of inaction, I see that sometimes is not really well thought or well communicated or well presented to boards. And I think it's where I think, you know, by the time you get that into the business plan, then you've got a very strong model in most of the cases.
Maria, do you see that at that point, the cost of inaction is a driver within companies at board level and at executive level to drive their thinking on net zero?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that net zero is not just a goal, it's a deadline. Yeah. And by not acting, costs will be higher, solutions will be more difficult to enact, and climate risk will be more severe. So I think companies know this. And I saw, I think last week, that 9 out of 10 CFOs are looking to invest more into climate and are expecting returns. So I think that tells a really positive story. And if you're in the UK, you might have also seen that from 2023 to 2024, there was a 10% growth in the net zero economy, 83.1 billion generated in value added. So, you know, I think from lots of angles, it's telling a pretty compelling story.
Thank you. I'm going to be looking around the audience from time to time in the room to see if there's any hands up. So if you catch me turning and you want to catch my eye, we'll try and take some questions from the floor throughout as we go. And the same goes if you're watching online. Your questions are coming in directly to my iPad, so I'll ask those as we go. But back to the panel, let's broaden this out. What are the biggest challenges and the biggest barriers and difficulties at the moment for companies in developing a credible net zero strategy?
I think I'll go first. Businesses we deal with, it's probably their supply chain. So it's probably really getting into their supply chain and working with their supply chain to reduce those emissions. I think a lot of organizations we work with, the sort of scope 1 and the scope 2 is a little bit easier to get their hands on. So what we see is organizations doing the small things quite quickly and quite well, but actually not addressing the bigger things. And then when they get to those bigger things, which may be working with their supply chain, they're hitting a bit more of a stumbling block. And actually, that's where some of the biggest benefits can come from. So we work right the way across our supply chain extremely collaboratively. So to make sure that those organizations are working with the same purpose as us to try and get the same end goals. So I would encourage, whilst it's a big challenge, it's a huge opportunity as well. So if organizations aren't in that space, you really, really should be looking to understand that better, using data, working with your suppliers, and looking at where those benefits can come through.
I think one challenge that can sometimes impact businesses is the sort of the timeline of thinking within business. So kind of shorter term thinking when it comes to things like payback. So, for example, in manufacturing, to get to net zero will require, in some sectors, in some cases, significant investment. So how you build that business case, which has, say, a longer payback period, in a context where there's maybe shorter term thinking in terms of how short payback periods should be, short-term investor demands to kind of reach cost-cutting measures or something like that. So I think having that appreciation of the timing of some of these investments might take in the long term. In the long run, there is a business case, but it's how you make sure that there's comfort within your organisation to reach that.
Yep. Jess, from your perspective, for your helicopter position, what do you see?
Yeah, so I think there are, of course, a lot of different challenges when it comes to sustainability, but tied to the idea of connecting with your supply chain that you were talking about, one of the hardest things that we see clients face is when you've got the sustainability team, and similarly to what I was saying before, operating almost in a silo. And then you might have your procurement team speaking to your suppliers or your buying team speaking to your customers, and they're not spreading the gospel with you. So I think it's really important to, one, get board buy-in, which others have mentioned, but beyond board buy-in, how are you building a team of advocates in your organization? So an example with one of our clients, a big FMCG company, we work with them firstly to get buy-in at the board level by doing a session on how to take sustainability from a cost to a value, doing benchmarking, looking at examples. Once there's that buy-in, it's then thinking, okay, how can we integrate this into our organization? We did a functional training for every single function in the organization on how does sustainability impact you in procurement? What are the types of questions you need to be asking your suppliers? How do you negotiate with your suppliers when it comes to sustainability? But then beyond that, they also did an intense climate training, 2 days, with the top 5%, not top 5%, but 5% of their team. And what they said, and this was a quote from my client, that doing this and training the team was the game changer that I never thought it would be when it comes to sustainability. And that's because it was no longer just down to her and her team. Actually, you have people throughout the organizations talking about it in the corridor, R&D, thinking about sustainability when it comes to designing the products. And it just became quite a beautiful thing, as much as that can be beautiful in the organization, with more advocates on her side. So I'd say that's one of the ways in which you can overcome some of that knowledge gap in your team, which can then stop progress in engaging with your supply chain.
Yeah, I can add, I'm really passionate about not having lonely sustainability managers. I've worked in the private sector, and I really believe in that, having cross-sector collaboration and across your different departments. Also, as an organization that sets standards, we are thinking about interoperability constantly. Companies are operating under so many different jurisdictional mandates and compliance demands, and so we are working on it. We have been signposted for ISO Net Zero guidelines, for example, and as well for ESRS.
Alessandro, one thought from you.
And I think, shifting a bit more on the technical side, I think, some sectors generally struggle with that, because especially heavy manufacturing sectors that, where technology is there but not as developed and as strong as they would think. I think in those heavy manufacturing sectors, I think there's an element of challenge about how do those businesses lobby with governments to create accelerators, hubs, or get some incentives and getting on with some sort of testing technology, testing innovations. Because I think what we see is that some businesses, if a technology is not mature enough, there's always a bit of uncertainty about investing huge amount of money on that. So I think the way that some good businesses have done is to get into sector programs or government-funded programs to really try and test that technology, and then if it works well with manufacturer, roll out that into their wide operations. But some of the sectors are generally there are genuine challenges from the technical side as well.
And just one thing we probably haven't touched on in terms of challenges that certainly we see a lot is just data. So, to understand where you are and where you need to be, you have to have a really good understanding of your data, how your business is running, how that benchmarks against other organizations. And some businesses are excellent at that, don't get me wrong, but others less so. And that is a challenge for them to even getting started sometimes.
Okay, I want to pick up a little later on the whole topic of collaboration internally and externally, and maybe have some more examples of what successful companies are doing. But I did notice there's a couple of questions in the room, and if Charlie the mic is somewhere, there's a gentleman in the middle who first caught my eye. Charlie the mic, there's the microphone at the back of the room, sir.
Yeah, hi. I'm Suryansh. I'm an associate partner in a consulting firm from Germany, and we did a benchmarking on net zero, especially focusing on manufacturing and logistic companies. And we saw that a lot of companies were having aggressive targets for 2030, 2040 to be net zero. But as the days or the date comes closer, they're pushing those targets or completely ramping them down or completely taking them off their website. My question to you guys is, how can we prevent net zero targets as being just a greenwashing exercise for the 10 years till the time we reach those dates?
Tom?
I mean, I should be careful, because with SBTI, I was going to say SBTI is the easy bit, but having gone through the SBTI process, it's not necessarily easy. But I think too many companies basically go through that process of setting targets and getting the external communications, the press release to announce that SBTI, really important step, but then almost kind of sit back and say, right, great, we've got that target done, tick. Was actually that's really where the work needs to start, and really having detailed roadmaps which are embedded into the organisation. I think that's the critical thing. So what does getting to net zero mean for your procurement team, for your finance team, for your other parts of the business, your operations team, and actually holding that being owned by the organisation, but also as you would have any other business metric being held to account as well. So not having that, I think, and with clear action plans defined. If you don't have that, then I think you're kind of setting yourself up for failure.
And it's partly, isn't it, about the integrity of your ethos, your DNA, your decision-making, and presumably it being evidence-based.
Absolutely, science-based, yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the title. I think, in terms of greenwashing, really important to have your targets validated. And I was going to say one more thing. Also reporting annually. Right now, companies don't report their science-based targets, but as part of their commitments and validated targets, they must report annually. I think that's really important externally, but also internally to show that, to track progress, see what's working, what's not working, where you need to really ramp up.
I know I'm going off piece, but loads of hands are going. There was a gentleman over here who I think was the first to catch my eye. Is there a microphone somewhere? Thank you. He's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows from the front, right in the middle with his hand up. How kind. Sir.
Thank you. Hi, Nick Daniel, former executive at Climate Partner, but more recently Global Commercial Director at Abatable, a carbon market integrated platform. And I think the one thing that we haven't really touched on here is the 10% carbon removals that we all need to achieve net zero. We talked about the cost of inaction. We talked about the significant investment and the timing required for those investments to secure supply to achieve these targets. So I just wanted to see what your strategies were, how you advise clients in relation to the carbon markets.
I'm happy to...
I can answer. Go ahead.
You go first.
I'll just say that for science-based targets, at the end of your net zero journey, 5 to 10% can be carbon removals. And we also to encourage everyone to look at our Beyond Value Chain Mitigation report and content, because it can, I agree, you can take steps now in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. And there's, Maria, I'd like to ask you about this later, but there's also a big thing that isn't really talked about. When it comes to your carbon footprint measurement annually, you're tracking the reduction year on year. But what a lot of companies don't look at is if you were 100 tons of CO2 last year, you're now 95 tons of CO2 this year. You've released over that time 195 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And by 2050, we've modeled this for some of our clients, they would have released 15 times their base year and doing nothing about those emissions. And actually for one of our clients that's a dairy company, by 2050, the amount of emissions they would release would make them the 7th highest emitting country in Europe this year. So there can be a huge amount of emissions that you're releasing whilst you're reducing. So reducing that we focus on is so important and it is urgent. I'm so glad we're here talking about it, but it's not the whole job and it's not the whole picture. And that's why the Beyond Value Chain Mitigation guidance from the SBTi is really important. And we talk to our clients about that to do the whole job, but then building up to the removals in the future, because ultimately what we're seeing with a lot of clients is growth can come at the cost of reductions. So with all the best intent in the world, are people reducing as much as they plan to be or want to be? And if not, global emissions are still rising. What are we going to do about it? And that's something we feel quite passionate about, looking at all the different solutions to get to net zero, not only one.
And can I take one more question, panel? Apologies for going off piece, but there's so many questions, it's amazing. One's come in online, which asks a question that I wanted to ask in a much better way. I was going to ask more about what a successful company is doing, give me good examples of what successful strategies are all about. Vera online has asked, can you give an example of a failing climate strategy that caused the board to abandon it due to short-term competitiveness issues? And what lessons can be learned? That turns it on the head. Could anybody dare speak up on that one?
Not sure my customers will be delighted with me sharing that, but I can't think of any specific. I think let's go back 10, 15 years and look at the digital revolution, and let's look at Blockbuster and Netflix both facing into the same opportunity that was out there in the market, and one of them decided to embrace where the future of that industry was going and the other one didn't. And it's a very, very clear example of a business being successful or being unsuccessful as a result of that. And I think just generally as a theme, we spoke earlier around opportunities, and if you look at the Gen Z generation coming through and the attractiveness of employees and the benefits that will come with this, there will be, I genuinely think this, there will be large organizations today that have not embraced this to the level that they need to, that will not be here and will not be household names in 10 to 20 years. And I genuinely believe that. So I don't have a live example now, but you can see people that are attracting more and are getting less market share and less input as a result. Have I been diplomatic enough in answering that question?
Yeah, I think that's as far as anyone dare go. Let's turn that around then. Is there anything in your strategies or strategies for clients you've worked with that you are particularly proud of, perhaps in some way innovative or groundbreaking?
I think, so for GKN Automotive, we announced our science-based target at the beginning of last year, and then we announced a first kind of European-wide PPA later on in the year. And I know obviously a lot of corporates have PPAs, very, very pretty common. But I think for the organisation to go through that process of defining there's a VPPA across Europe was a really significant milestone. And I think one of the main reasons I see that, apart from obviously the carbon reduction side of it, is actually how cross-functional it was. And you had teams in treasury, in procurement, operations working on a project for renewable electricity that was really quite new to them. So it was a whole new sort of world of how you procure energy, really, and the kind of agreements and the legal agreements you have. And I think that was something I was really proud of, because it was so cross-functional and you had that buy-in and that action from so many different functions across the business.
Which talks very much to the point you were making earlier, Jess, about empowering and motivating the whole organisation and all departments to play their part. That's an extra, more formal level of collaboration. And presumably, is that your experience, Alessandra, at WSP, that you need to bring in all aspects of your business on the same, not just the same journey, but on the same development?
Absolutely. I think our approach to clients' work, any work we do, is led by our program, which is called Future Ready. And we've got this program running for 5-6 years now, where I think any element of advice that we provide has sustainability embedded on it, which touch on local communities, long-term resilience of businesses, but also, what's the impact of anything we do to clients? And we measure it. So I think, having that embedded sustainability and future readiness into advice, I think is really key. And yeah, we got clients that, did all of that and developed that embedded process, 20 years ago, and now, they can see the results. And they are not really disrupted now. Obviously, still challenges are there, but I think, once you embed that process, that mindset, I think it's a very long-term win.
Sorry, Tom, were you going to pick?
No, let's go.
In the previous keynote, Gerard was making one of the big takeaway points about the need to make hard-headed business decisions, drive your sustainability strategy. Otherwise, maybe your board or leadership will be less inclined to get involved. Maybe I hope I've summed that up fairly. So let's talk about financial balance. How do businesses balance the financial costs of bringing in an effective strategy, particularly with short-term profitability in mind?
I think it's a very hard one. Every business is in a different position. They may be not performing profitably well one year so you have to take all of that into account. But if you take a neutral position of an averagely performing business that they want to grow their organisation, I think the first thing is it needs to be done by increment, right? So there needs to be incremental gains in what you're doing. So there is quick, tangible output that can be seen by the organisation. If you can use that as a foundation, then you're getting a lot more confidence from your organisation to say, do you know what, these initiatives are increasing EBITDA, or they're increasing customer satisfaction, or whatever the metric by which you measure it. It is then much easier to start layering on the bigger stuff and say, well, what if we did this and what if we did that? I think you can't, whilst I said earlier you need to address the big stuff, you absolutely do. You can't just jump to some massive initiative that is going to have a huge capital investment and is going to have a 10-year payback, as you were saying earlier, because you'll just get pushed back on. So you need the foundation of small incremental wins and some quick wins in there, and I know that's slightly cliche, but it is true. That breeds confidence for people to then invest further and then step up upon that, and you can build more of a plan on that. And we see that with a lot of our customers where, we're doing a big project with a large bank at the moment, which involves us working with, multiple different organizations in their supply chain, in our customer base, all around water offsetting for their entire estate. And that started very, very small with a handful of small projects. And it's now got into a very senior buy-in process within their side of the business and within our side of the business of working in collaboration to deliver an outcome. And there's other organizations that are benefiting from that as well. So it's a bit of momentum, and Jessica was speaking earlier about getting, the sort of behavioral side and getting enough people on board. You have to get a certain percentage of people on board with anything, with any initiative, with any behavioral change, or it simply won't take off.
And I think, easy wins, short-term returns is the easiest way to buy in organizations. So if you're good at using the quick wins, short win, to fund the long-term strategy, that's absolutely, I think it's a win-win, because, what people can see, the results in 1-2 years' time, that's, reality, so people can see the impact of that net zero strategy. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I think the role of quick wins is...
and that pragmatism as well, which was we talked about in the previous session, being pragmatic around what you do. I think also you mentioned earlier around making sure that the business really understands the cost of not doing anything as well. Mm-hmm. So if you're not doing it, what does that mean in terms of your customer expectations, your investor expectations, maybe regulation as well? So understanding the value of it, but also understanding if you don't do it, what the opportunity lost would be as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because one of our clients, I really love their approach. They produce all of Tesco's potatoes. And for them, they use sustainability as an opportunity actually to collaborate with Tesco. So they strengthened the relationship with them, made it even stickier, and they've co-invested, and I believe they've got some additional subsidies and funding into a project of low-carbon fertilizer, which reduces the emissions by up to 90%. So there's some really practical, actionable things that you can get out of the collaboration. Plus, then they're creating this stronger customer relationship and potentially a new business stream for them with net zero potatoes. So there's some interesting ways in which you can frame it from a profitability perspective too.
I have a question online that touches on that. And then after that, there's a question from the lady right at the back in the green top that I can see in the gloom at the back. And we'll see where we go from there. So a question online which touches on exactly that. Thank you, Nathan, online. With supply chains being 80% or more of total emissions, what are you seeing in terms of supply chain leaders actually being really committed to your sustainability targets?
I can speak maybe a little bit on what I've heard from some companies that have set targets, where they're building it into the contract, where they're having sort of, a phased approach. And, companies that have maybe 9,000 suppliers, they could be completely overwhelmed by how we're going to get them all on board. But by having that phased approach, I've been in conversations with Bosch. They've now reached 3,500 of those suppliers and are making progress. So building it into your contracts is one way, and continuing that education process, continuing to engage them little by little, you can make a lot of progress.
Yeah, I've seen quite a considerable shift, and a very positive shift in the last, sort of 4 or 5 years. And customers, we're dealing with the arse on us as a supplier from that side to evidence what we're doing as an organisation. And there'll be large contracts we simply wouldn't have won if we weren't doing what we were doing on our net zero target and how we manage our organisation and our supply chain. And similarly, in terms of the diligence and auditability we put on our supply chain, it's very heavily measured and targeted within our, procurement division, as it were, within our organisation to make sure that that is done. And no one in our supply chain would be in our supply chain if they weren't aligned to the purpose and direction of our business, of what we're doing. So we won't make any sacrifices there. We wouldn't work with company A because they're great. If they didn't have those credentials, they simply wouldn't be a supplier of ours. And I think that more and more people are like that now. It's becoming the norm rather than the exception, which is hugely positive.
But if your supply chain takes you around the world to some pretty difficult to get to parts of the world, whatever, how practical is it? How easy is it? How difficult is it to actually have them comply with what you want?
It is tough. We're quite lucky in the fact we don't have that challenge, right? We don't have a global supply chain. So I know it's slightly easier for me to sit here and say that. But there are, if you have a global supply chain and you need people around the world, people will work in different ways, right? And it is about finding the people that are working in that best way and doing that auditability and doing that diligence. Yes, people will still need to fly around the planet at certain times to do certain things. That will be unavoidable for certain industries. We get that, but it's about doing it in the right way and minimizing where is necessary to do those things.
I am minded that procurement and supply chain is on the stage next door.
Yeah.
Did the microphone get to the person at the back of the room there? Thank you.
Hi there, Fenella Lockyer. I head up ESG strategy at Seismic. We're a sustainability advisory. Thank you very much for all of these insights. It's been hugely intriguing listening to everything you've discussed. What we find, especially with the last question you mentioned around the cost of sustainability, a lot of the work we do is really trying to reframe the narrative to be more around investment and to actually really try and articulate the value of acting today. So there's definitely an element of the cost of inaction, but also investing today ensures you have a business to the long term. My question is around net zero strategies. We do a lot of net zero pathways for our clients. And a lot of the time, and to pick up on the question previously asked around greenwashing with net zero, to what extent do you think we really need to be driving a message of progress over perfection? I totally agree that net zero is a deadline as opposed to a goal. However, what we see as well is businesses that are projecting exponential growth, which, as you know, doesn't necessarily align with absolute reductions. So to what extent can we really land that message with companies that want to grow? How can we ensure that they don't just give up because they think it's impossible, and actually we make those steps to ensure they can create value and action in the short term, and in the longer term, it's something that really requires industry cohesion to really drive a collective effort towards.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you make about short-term value is the vital point. You've got to be able to demonstrate that. We were speaking earlier about quick wins and things like that. That's the really vital point with those types of businesses. You can't have people sort of rabbit in the headlights looking at a huge investment and a long return curve on these things. So it's trying to get that in, get that there. Your point on greenwashing, we mentioned it earlier, it really comes down to diligence, and it really comes down to doing that research in terms of where that investment is going and working with those organizations to make sure it's the right thing.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the clock. One really quick question and one really quick answer. There's a hand shot up in my eye line. Where's the microphone? Just gentleman at the back. Very quickly, sir.
Very quickly. Stuart Green from Gentrack. I'd just like to hear your views on, this is a long-term game, right? Targets are going to run out to potentially 2050. So directors and execs may not be in their positions at that time, so they're selling something they may not be accountable for thereafter. What's your experience of linking in remuneration to climate targets and baking that into the exec and the board as a mechanism to help support corporate strategy?
Tom?
I think again it's around really embedding net zero into the way companies operate. So most companies have incentives around other metrics across the business. So absolutely, they should have carbon reduction as part of that, and I've certainly seen it work in other organisations. It's about embedding, and if we're doing that in other areas, then we should be doing that in this area.
And one more person for 10 seconds. Who wants to pick? Jess.
This is something I love. I had the CEO of one of my clients call me up asking about sustainability and what's happening. And then I spoke to the head of sustainability the week later, and she told me that his bonus has just been linked to sustainability. So I think there can be this huge power and drive from incentivizing and motivating people, and we've seen it happen.
Well, look, this is grossly unfair, but panel, can I have 20 seconds each on your number one key takeaway on the development or execution of an excellent corporate strategy on sustainability? Alessandro.
Being pragmatic, embed sustainability, and work for the medium long term, using the short term win as a solid buy-in.
Was that 3?
Yeah, maybe 4.
Just checking. Tom.
I think just business case.
Yep.
Like what it's not about relying on external regulation or kind of the heart as much as we maybe like to, but you've got to have a strong business case.
Thank you, Tom.
Leadership and data, simple as that. Lead from the top, as we've just been saying, and use data to inform the right decisions.
We've hardly touched on data, which is a huge issue, and I hope we'll pick up on that later, and certainly in the next day or two. Jess?
Don't forget the impact. It can be really easy to get lost in the complexity. Keep impact at the forefront and think about the spheres of influence you can engage with to make that happen.
Yeah, mine's very easy. Set science-based targets. Report progress annually. Set science-based targets so you can know how fast and by how much you need to reduce.
Thank you, panel. If ever there was a sign of a really interesting, vibrant debate, it's the amount of hands that shoot up in the room and the amount of questions that have come into me online. And I do apologise if I've not been able to get to them all. But you know their faces. You can collar these people outside. I'm sure you're not going to run away, are you? We're eating into your tea and coffee break here. So I'm going to wrap up there and for about 20 minutes. Can I just thank the panel very much indeed? It's been brilliant.